And what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. We've got more not so deep dives coming your way as we head north of the border to chat CF Montreal with Elias from The Ball is Round Montreal. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, excited to get this going. It's been you are number 15, I think, 14
All
or
right.
15 that we've done in the last week. So lots of interviews, meeting a lot of really cool people and having a lot of really good conversations. So along with all of that, we are seeing a lot of very cool soccer scarves for Scarf of the Week. I want to throw it over to you. What are you rocking today?
I've got the Barcelona scarf. I got this in Barcelona when I
Very
went to
cool.
go watch a game. That was one of the coolest things I was ever a part of. And yeah, they won 5-0 today. They're on to the semifinals of Copa del Rey. So, after so many years, it's good to have a team that you can be excited to watch again.
Listen, you see this hat? I know all
I'm
about
I'm
it.
well aware. Yeah.
I am rocking a one may say vintage. So I've got
Hell yeah.
Montreal Impact on one side with the floor on the
I
other
remember
side.
that scarf.
Yeah,
That's a good scarf.
yeah, I like
You've
this
got
one.
yourself
So
you've got yourself a good scarf right there.
we have a saying on the show that if you're going to be a good scarf, you have to meet in the middle, right? That's a big part of my scarf game. I've got a whole bunch of them, and I separate them out like good, bad, not so good, and the good ones
Mhm.
all meet in the middle. And this gets a double good because it
Yeah.
meets on both sides. So we're a big fan of it.
Yeah, well, you'll see that a lot at Stats of Puro because there's still a lot of people that are, very attached to the old identity before the rebrand. So,
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
and I don't understand why you've rebranded personally, but that's a conversation for another day. I thought this
that's
was
that's 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 a whole entire podcast if you want.
correct, and we'll have to one day, but maybe not today. I think people want to
Man,
hear 2025
yeah,
CF Montreal. So listen, Laurent Courtois is back for year two,
he is.
and 2024 not so good, right? They lost their playing game in MLS Cup playoffs after an eighth place finish in the regular season, which wasn't bad, but that was coupled with a quarterfinal loss to Forge FC in the Canadian Championship and a round of 32 exit from the League's Cup at the hands of Philadelphia. But they've got new reinforcements in the team, and they are entering 2025 with MLS play, the Canadian Championships, and League's Cup in their sights. How did you feel after 2024 ended?
That's the thing. They ended 2024 in phenomenal form. They were, on the outside looking into the playoffs, and they ended up going like a 6-game unbeaten run. They were unbeaten in 8 of their last 9, if I'm not mistaken. They were playing the best football they played all season. So it kind of skewed everyone's perception of the season because of how well they ended it, even with the loss to Atlanta. So if this is any indication of them maybe finally beginning to understand what Laurent Courtois wants from his players, then you can naturally expect, this evolution and continuous progression next season. So I think that's why there's a bit more optimism for a team than what's expected for a team who got, knocked out of the play-in. And it's for good reason because, if they had been able to replicate that form a bit more consistently, then they wouldn't even have to play the play-in game.
Yeah, yeah, and that's always the thing, right? Is the playing game really the playoffs? Everybody has that argument, and I
I,
could see
I
it
I
both
consider it
ways.
postseason. So,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, and that's I think that's totally fair. But I think one of the positive reasons and the reason why you might have a little bit more hope and admiration for 25 is the fact that you guys have been relatively active in the transfer market
Mhm.
up to this point, which uh, I think in years past for Montreal is not always the case. Outside of your usual Bologna center back loan. So, who is the best addition you think that you've made so far?
There's a couple, and a lot of them are very dependent on how they fit in the system. You have your Jack Mavrioni, you have your Prince Owusu, you have your Jalen Neal, who is probably more of a sure thing given how good he is on the ball. My most interesting addition, at least, has to be Fabian Herbers from
Mm.
Chicago Fire, because here's a player who is essentially a Swiss Army knife. You could put him anywhere on the field in the middle, and even if you want a little bit on the sides, depending on the team you're playing, and you can get reliable results. And that's one of the things that Montreal struggled with the most last season was reliability. Was, if I put a player in this position, no matter the circumstance, no matter who they're playing against, will this player deliver? And here you have a veteran center back, central midfielder, sorry, who has all this experience, who has all this MLS experience, which is the most important thing, And the fact that, you lose so many veteran players, including Victor Wanyama, you need that veteran presence in there to kind of coach up this still extremely young team. And a lot of the players brought in, yeah, you have someone like Herbert brought in, but everyone else is under the age of, besides Giacomo Vrioni, is under the age of 25. So it's still an incredibly young team, and they added even more youth. And that's been their brand forever. And that will be their brand, for the foreseeable future with this current setup. So someone like that could really be one of the deciding factors in how well they do this season. And if they do end up, finding a lot of success, you could look at him as maybe one of those catalysts.
Yeah, yeah, I that's a really good explanation for him. When you look at Fabian Herbert, it's like, okay, this dude's been on 900 teams. He has played in 900 positions, and it almost felt like, or on paper, it's like, okay, it's just a name to fill the roster. But I really love the I guess the description of how he's going to play in the team, the rationalization of
Yeah.
how he's going to help out, right? Yeah, there we go. I got there eventually. Um, I myself have just loved the Jalen Neal move. The second it was announced,
Hmm.
I went over the moon for it. I think the back line was a huge issue last year. I think Neal not getting consistent first team minutes was a huge issue. This is a match made in heaven, and I think they're both going to benefit from it very, very much. I really can't wait to see him play in Montreal.
Yeah, he's phenomenal on the ball,
Yep.
and he's got the youth, he's got the energy, he has that, U.S. national team connection with George Campbell, who is again another center back, and they were at the camp together along with Caden Clark. So there is that bond, and again, you're moving across the continent, not just a country, completely different
Right.
culture, different weather, different, literally different everything, different
Everything.
state the club is in. So there is a certain amount of adjustment needed, but having those national team people that he did spend, 2 weeks at camp with, in the national team camp is going to help. But yeah, I agree with you. I saw them pick up Jalen Neal, and I had no idea he was available because
Yeah.
that's one of those players that you keep for as long as possible until he's ready for Europe.
So we just posted our LA Galaxy preview with
Hmm.
La Cuna Galaxiana. And when I talked about biggest loss, it was Jalen Neal. And the only
Absolutely.
thing I put was I thought Jalen Neal was untouchable because he
I
was
mean,
the
I don't know
future.
how he isn't.
Yeah, I was like, he's the future, and I'm like, Montreal, well done getting him. You guys are going to do really, really well there. So, if we're talking losses as we transition in here, who there are a lot of players who are also on the way out. Who's the biggest loss for Montreal so far?
Purely on the field, you have to say Joseph Martinez just because of what he brought to the team and how difficult he is to replace, just in terms of such a complete player. The way that he was finally starting to get things going. Caden Clark talked about it in his media availability last week. He ended up becoming one of his best friends on the pitch because, just in and out of training, of games, when you're playing this well together, you develop that bond. And again, I kept on saying it was too early to say, but it did give me flashes of George Mihailovic and Romel Kyoto, the way that they were actively looking for each other and bringing out the best in one another. And that relationship was, that was, the best of times, and then there was the worst of times without them, right? And it did feel like it was at least the start of a relationship like that, right? That was arguably one of the most successful partnerships in the club's history. So I'm not going to label them as successful as that, but there were certain characteristics that you look at and you go, I see it.
Hmm.
And there's a whole bunch of factors that led to Joseph Martinez not sticking around, and it is unfortunate. But when you look at the laundry list of players that left, that's definitely the one that sticks out the most.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a real good shout. And one of the things, first of all, I wanted to go back to something. I think you found it really funny when you're like, oh yeah, you've got Jalen Neal, U.S. men's national team, Campbell, Caden Clark. It's like, yeah, to develop our men's national team, we need to send them to Montreal, Canada, because of course we do. Isn't that funny? Oh man.
Hey, keep sending internationals this way, and I don't think the club's going to complain.
Yeah, yeah, they've been pretty good so far. So and they played very well too. That's another story for another time. But they played well. I think you got a bright future with that group. But I looked at all these bigger name losses, right? Ruan, Raheem Edwards, who thank you, very excited to have him in New York.
He's going to do
Um,
good.
yeah, Chonier, Kokaro, Martinez. I feel like they've all been replaced all right. Like I look at those wide backs, Edwards and Ruan, and I'm like, okay, that's maybe not so good. And I mean, there was a player who played for them, and I'm gonna look up his name really quick because I didn't write it down. But he came in. I think it was David Bragg. I might be wrong if it's the wrong side. No, it is. It's Tom Pierce. Tom Pierce was the one I
Yeah.
really liked. Tom Pierce came in, and I was like, oh my, that is a him and Amador are going to be two phenomenal outside backs in the East this year. Like, I love the way they play. They're very, very attacking. It's okay, you can move on from Edwards at that point, right? You got
Yeah,
Shaquille Marshall-Ruddy. You can move on from Juan, right? You've got Caden Clark. You can move on from Shonier, right? You got Cocodoro Martinez. You're going to move on from them. Who are you going to bring in? Giacomo Veroni, who I think is going to be revived here. I really want him to be revived here. And you've got Owusu, who had his best year in Toronto and knows Canada really well, right? Like, there isn't anybody who you lost and it's like, oh, you definitely like Jordy Mihailovic in 23, right? Like, okay, yeah, that's a big one, right? But this group feels like you've moved on, but also have replaced really well. So I went with Chonier here, who I know moved like mid-season, but just he felt like he was a big part of what the team was.
absolutely.
He was a homegrown player, I believe, if that's if
Hmm.
that's correct.
Yep.
And again, Caden Clark, I think is going to step in and be a part of it. And you just hate to lose homegrowns there, but I don't think Montreal got like significantly worse when they moved on from these players. So I'm excited for what they can do.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Not, I think the loss of Mathieu Choinière, who was not arguably, he was Montreal's best player last year and in
Yep.
the beginning of last, 2 years ago, and in the beginning of last season, was the fact that Nathan Saliba stepped up in such a way that it was almost as if not only did they not miss, but you have this again homegrown player, again an academy talent that is operating at a similar level, maybe not as much offensively, but in terms of in a double pivot, who was doing the job as well, and is also 5 years younger. And so you
Yeah.
look at that, and then you think to yourself, missing out on Mathieu Choinière hurts because, again, for all the reasons you listed, homegrown player, workhorse, super versatile, finally had his breakout season. Then the contract stuff kind of blew everything up. And the
Hmm.
way he left so unceremoniously
Yeah.
maybe soured it a bit more than fans were hoping. Because if he leaves at the end of the season, or if he leaves mid-season in a transfer that was fully expected, that's one thing. But with the contract getting rejected and the trade request and everything that went down in that week from hell, that then was followed by Olivier Renard leaving, was just really it soured his end with the club, which is not something you want because again, he is probably the most successful academy graduate so far. And to have it end that way is really disappointing, given how, Ismail Kone left and how George Mihailovic left and Alistair Johnson left. And they were left with like, flowers and saying good luck in Europe
Hmm.
and we're with you and all this stuff. And then Mathieu Choinière was like, I guess we gotta sell you now.
Right. Yeah. And that we just got done with Portland, and we were just talking
Mhm.
about how, man, it sucks to see what Evander did for Portland, and then having him go out the way he did. Chonier fits directly into that category as well, and
Absolutely.
Luciano Costa as well in that scenario. Like, players who have given so much to your team and brought them to where they are, to then just be kind of cast aside like just another player. It sucks to see, and they got paid a little bit for him. I think they probably should have gotten a little bit more, but you
Absolutely,
know,
they could have.
yeah, they got a ton of players back in though. So I'm interested to see how they kind of merge in, and somebody's going to need to step up, right? There are going to be players who are going to have to step in to roles because there's a decent bit of turnover in that group.
Mhm.
Who's the player to watch, or who's the player that might break out this year that we should keep an eye on?
It's got to be Caden Clark. It's got to be Caden Clark, right? The way he ended the
Kane.
season, the form he was in, again, that goal for the national team against Venezuela, the confidence he's coming into the season with. You can't really look at anybody else other than Caden Clark. The only other person that is probably has expectations anywhere near as high as him is Nathan Saliba, who finally had this season where he took the reins of not only the midfield but of the entire game, when they were at their best. And he could really run the entire show at will. And so those are probably the two players. I'd probably lean on Caden Clark a bit more because of the fact that the offense, and we'll talk about this later because that's, one of the next topics.
Hmm.
Um, the offense needs this direction and needs this catalyst to kind of get the job done. And Caden Clark right now seems to be in pole position to be doing that. Whereas the midfield is a little bit more solid and a little bit more settled. So I'd say that he's probably the one to watch. But Nathan Saliba is poised to have an all-star level season if he continues with the progression from what we saw last season. He could very easily be an all-star this year.
I like it. I like it. Anytime we can talk about Caden Clark is cool with me, man. Like,
Absolutely.
I am so disappointed that he didn't work out for us. Like, literally one appendix surgery and he was
Hmm.
just upended. And I'm really glad to see him, 'cause he went to Montreal. I was like, man, I'm playing right wing back in Montreal.
Yeah,
Like, it
well,
was a
he talked about it.
nightmare.
Yeah, he talked about it. He did not enjoy playing out of position, and Lac Courtois gave him the keys to the kingdom and said,
Yeah.
"Go nuts," and he took it completely.
Yeah, and that's the sort of player that we saw when he was brought over from Minnesota to Red Bull and thrust in. It was like, this kid's young. He's got potential, but he's got a lot of work to do. But if you allow him to grow properly, he's going to be something special. And then we sold him overseas to because Red Bull were like, thank you for doing your due diligence. We're going to take him to where it matters now. And they ruined him. So he comes back and then he goes to Minnesota, gets played out of position. It's like, you're going to ruin this kid. He's got so much potential. He was in the national team before he went to Red Bull Leipzig, I
Leipzig, yeah.
believe. Yeah, I
Well, when
think
when you think about it, right, you're competing for a position with arguably three of the best attacking midfielders in the world right now, in Szoboszlai and Nkunku and Dani Olmo. So it's a
right.
great learning experience, but there's no way in hell you're getting minutes in your position. It's
No.
just not going to happen.
Yeah, and it's like, and that's the other thing too. Like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to go over there and be a 22-year-old American kid against some literally world-class players,
Yeah.
and I'm either going to sit there on the bench and do nothing, or I'm going to go out on loan 100 times. And we saw what happened with Matt Miazga. He did that to Chelsea. Went to Chelsea, went to 5 countries or yeah, 5 countries in 5 years, and then now has come home and done better. But is that the right move for you at the time, or is it okay, I'm buying into the European hype. That's another conversation for another day. But I
It's
was
an entire
disappointed.
show you could do
Yes.
about
Oh
that.
yeah. And we have.
Yeah.
But listen, I'm really, really glad to see him pop up and do that because again, he's a favorite of mine. I love Caden
Hmm.
Clark when he played. Caden only scored bangers. That is certified as a Red Bull fan. And he it's good to see him back into his vibe, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. For me, and I hinted to this before, it's Giacomo Veroni, right? I think he had a
Hmm.
terrible time in New England, but you saw the quality towards the end of his time, right? His last year, he was okay, maybe teetering on good. And I'm curious if a different environment, because New England, if anybody who's listening didn't know, New England, not so good. So he was not doing super hot over there, and it wasn't all his fault, I promise you. So I think coming here and being the guy with some other players around, and again, I think maybe his system fits better with Courtois' system, right? Where it's more of a build-up instead of, give it to Carlos Hill and then let him do whatever he wants, and you
Yeah.
better read Carlos Hill, and if you don't, you're screwed, right? Here, it's a little bit more team oriented, or at least it feels that way when I watch them play. It's a
It
little bit more
is.
team oriented.
They have to win by committee because they don't have a Carlos Hill type that can get you, 20, 25, 30 goal contributions in a season. Um, but that's another thing. Laurent Courtois, yes, when you have Joseph Martinez, maybe you make some concessions, but especially at the beginning of the season, what he wanted from his strikers was to occupy center backs. Joseph Martinez is not made to
No,
occupy center backs.
no,
That's
he
not how
is
that works.
not.
Giacomo Veroni, on the other hand, right, you're 6'2", 6'3", you're built like a truck.
Yep.
That's what you want. And too many times, especially at the beginning of the season before they found their footing, they just lacked simplicity in the penalty area in the final third. And that's something that I feel like he can really deliver because, again, he's just a traditional target man number nine. And when they get into those dangerous areas, especially with someone like you said, Tom Pierce, who is probably the best deliverer of a ball since Alistair Johnson was at the club, probably looked at, Prince Owusu and Jack Morfione signing and was like salivating.
Thank you. I am excited. So we are doing a when we do our predictions, we do
Hmm.
we're adding one this year. It's called the David Goss Theorem Player of the Year. Guy who was signed in midway through last year, who's going to be out of his mind in 2025 or the upcoming year. And he is on my list of considerations. He may get an honorable mention because there is one other that I'm considering heavily, but I'm so excited to watch him play. Amador's in there too, but I think he is a player that they desperately needed to build the system that Courtois wants to play. So I'm excited to see him play.
They just gotta get him into training because he's still doing solo work in training camp.
Oh,
So
really? Oh
yeah,
man.
so I don't know if it's a knock. They've been very coy about it. I don't know if it's a knock. I don't know if it's he's just kind of getting his fitness back up because he did join a week late.
Hmm.
But it's been 3 weeks now that he's with the club. So you're kind of expecting him to,
Right. Get
you know,
involved now.
exactly. And plus they got friendlies coming up. You got to be
Yeah.
involved in that.
Yeah. Come on, Big Lug. Come on. All right. So we're here in 2025. It
Mhm.
is a relatively new look team. You got some of the guys who are still there. What is the one question left with Montreal that you are kind of considering as we head into the season?
What is, and this is everyone's question, is what is the attacking shape?
Mhm.
Everyone knows what the formation more or less is going to be. It's going to be a 3-4 what? right? You get your double pivots, you got your wingbacks, but is it going to be a 10 and two strikers? Is it going to be a 10, a secondary striker, someone that plays off like, Sunusi Ibrahim or Mahalo Opoku, and then a proper target man? Is it going to be two tens and a striker like last season? There's so many options right now, and there's such a wide variety of options that it's very difficult to pin down. I don't think the club even knows yet because when you look at, you know, both the friendlies and also an inter-squad scrimmage they had last Friday, they tried multiple different layouts because they have such different players with such different profiles. So I think at least to start the season, assuming everyone is fit and available, they're going to be going with what is most familiar, which is the two tens and a
Mhm.
striker. And then I guess as the newer players who will be deciding whether or not they do switch up attacking themes are performing, they can maybe then, tweak it a little bit. But I think right now it's going to be a straightforward 3-4-2-1. But there's so many question marks because there's so many different players that are brought in. And now your strikers, which were, Matias Kokoro, Joseph Martinez, Sunusi Ibrahim, who are, again, not that tall, and you replace it with Giacomo Vrioni and Prince Owusu, who are decidedly so. So I think it brings a different kind of profile, and then it asks all these questions. And I still think they have to figure that out, and they should do it sooner rather than later, especially if you're trying to win by committee, because you don't
Right.
want questions. That's not how that works.
No, yeah, that's not setting you up for success. For myself, as an outsider looking in, I'm wondering if Courtois is actually the guy to do this.
Hmm.
He came in last year with all this hype from, Crew 2, talent developer, Nancy ball style of play, like he's the next Nancy. You know, it got him into a play-in game and they lost in PKs. They've now given him some decent reinforcements. They've given him the players to do his job and play his system the way he wants to play it. Is he going to be the guy to take them into a position that can be successful, right? And I'm just not so sure. That's kind of my thing.
I mean, I kind of get it because from the outside, right, it's a rookie coach that, had a difficult first season, granted, especially in the middle of the year when, it was 11 games in all competitions without a win or something like that. But this is now, I think they're the best placed to find success for multiple reasons, and it's he finally has his staff, right?
Hmm.
He's got some really important MLS Next Pro guys that have been brought in Thailand, and also Kobe Johnson, who was his assistant at Columbus Crew too. You
Hmm.
also have Marco Donadel, who is uh, an institution at the club and who is a club legend. And so he has his staff. This was his first offseason. This was, the players brought in were players that he was advised on. Everything done in the offseason was under his management. So now, and if you take a look at, the current state of Canadian MLS clubs in both Vancouver and Toronto, it's not going well.
Right.
And this is the first time in a long time I can remember that Montreal is the most stable Canadian MLS club because, it's been turmoil ever since Nancy left.
Right.
And so they are in prime position to contend and if not win the Canadian Championship this year, which I think will go a long way in maybe selling him a bit more. President Gabriel Javes said it in no uncertain terms. The goal is to win silverware this year. So
Right.
if you don't win that, your job gets infinitely more difficult because let's face it, this team is improving, but they are not an MLS Cup, Supporter Shield, even Leagues Cup
Hmm.
level team yet.
Right.
So I think the pressure is on him to at the very least show evolution from last season. Because if you go to another, even if you win a play-in game and lose in the first round, it's not really progression, right? It's how you go about it,
Hmm.
and can you deliver a first round berth with any kind of security and show more consistency is what I think the pressure is really on for him.
Yeah. One of my, I won't say hot takes. One of my not so hot takes was this might be a year that a non-MLS team wins a Canadian championship because Toronto looks like garbage. Vancouver doesn't look so good. Montreal is up and down. You never know.
Yeah.
Like it could be like Pacific or Forge that come in and do something special here.
That's not ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's and they've been knocking at the door for a while, and
Hmm.
they've been taking MLS teams to the limit, if not beating them for a while. So it's not a ridiculous thing to think about, especially you hit the right form at the right time.
Yeah. That's something to keep an eye on for sure.
Absolutely. They deserve way more respect, and they're gonna earn it.
I definitely want to keep an eye on CPL this year. And again, completely different conversation, but I've been
Such an
interested in
entertaining
the
league.
Yeah, I've been
The
very
title race is
interested in it.
always phenomenal. The playoffs are always phenomenal. It's just it's the best kind of football because it's
Nice.
just no holds barred.
Yeah, just have fun and do it. I like it.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, here we are. We're talking about players in, players out, breakout players, questions, all this sort of stuff.
Mhm.
Let's wrap it up and put a number on it. Where in the is this team finishing? And I'll give you a range. You can go a
Mhm.
range if you like, but where are they finishing in the table this year?
Optimistically,
Hmm.
they're aiming for seventh to fifth. I think that is optimistic while within the realm of possibility based on how they ended the season last year. I think that, you want to improve on last season. You have to improve on last season. And that means not getting into a play-in game. So I'd
Right.
say seventh to fifth is fairly reasonable. I'm not expecting them to make top four off the rip, especially with how good, still, even with all the changes, the Eastern Conference is. But seventh to fifth is more than acceptable.
I like it. I was back and forth on this team for a while because I like their roster build. I think it is getting to a point where it's like, okay, this is a solid 11 to 15 guys that you can trust
Hmm.
every week. I'm not sold on Courtois yet. I'm not sold on if he is flexible enough to go from, okay, the system isn't working, we need to do something that's going to win, versus nope, we're going to play my system until they tell me I can't play it anymore. So I'm not so sold on that, and I'm also not. I was not until recently, and this is why I keep going back and forth. I was like, I don't know how far the back line can take them, right? Like you've got Neil now, you've got Campbell, right? Like it's getting there. You got Pierce on one side, you got Marshall right on the other. You're looking for another center back, maybe Joel Waterman, right? But then you've only got one other center back you can kind of slide in there, and that's about it. I think the center midfield is okay, not great, right? I think they're making moves in there that are okay. I like Bryce Duke, I like Caden Clark. Yankov's another question mark for me. I know he came in on decent hype and didn't quite get there. I think he was injured, if I remember
He
correctly.
got he wasn't training with the club at Ludogorets when he was on his way out. He got hurt when he
Mm,
got here. Playing in Bulgaria is not the same as playing in MLS. One
no.
end of the country to the other is like Montreal to Philly.
Yep.
So and he just did not adapt well. I give foreign players a year to
Yep.
kind of get used to it, especially when you're in Montreal. But this year, it's kind of, you don't have that much wiggle room.
Yeah. I do have them still fighting for the play-in game. So I've got them between
Mhm.
8 and 12. So I do think that this is a team that can get into the postseason again. I
Absolutely.
think that because it's not that hard. Let's
No,
be honest.
not
It's not
anymore.
that
Not
difficult.
anymore. No.
And they've got a roster that can do it. So, assuming they stay healthy, right? They've got players that I think are up there, right? If Rioni doesn't work out or Owusu doesn't work out, I've always been a big fan of Sanusi Ibrahim. I've always liked Mahalo
Club
Opoku,
legend.
and I really, really like Jules Anthony Vilson. I think that he has a very high ceiling and
Speaking of
can,
staying fit,
yes,
yeah, that's the
exactly.
problem,
And
right?
that's why I had to throw it in there because you're looking at these players and you're like, when did you guys get Dante Sealy too?
Today,
No
today
kidding.
we
Did I
didn't get the
really
chance to
miss
talk
that?
about it. Yeah, he was signed today. I mean, he was on trial the entire training camp,
Right.
and I wasn't blown away by him, but he did bring this kind of athleticism and this dynamic side of play, and this very attacking minded side of play that
Hmm.
Laurent Gaultier wants in his fullbacks.
Yeah.
But yeah, they announced it today, and
That's that's
look, all they had was Tom Pierce at left back. They didn't have
yeah.
anybody else because
Yeah,
Sergei
needed.
Kufovsky was sent back to the academy,
Hmm.
who is also a very promising up and coming Canadian international. Just joined at 17. He's with the U20s, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, you need another left back,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
Well, and
so
and and his
it's
big
a
thing
no-brainer.
was when we talked about him last year, his big thing was mentality. Like he came in thinking he
Mhm.
was the guy. And he was okay, not great, like you mentioned, didn't really ball out, but he came in thinking like I'm gonna walk this place and it's gonna be no problem at all. And he had to learn how to be a bench guy. So
Yeah,
especially if he's gonna be backing up Tom Pierce, he's gonna have to learn to do that. So again, very, very interesting move. I did not know that happened. Look at that. Live reactions on the pod. We love it. Elias, thanks so much for being here. We really,
my
really
pleasure.
enjoyed this chat. I really, really had a good time. Take a minute, tell people where to find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at the E Grigoriadis. You can find us at the Ball is Round Montreal podcast. We're available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. You could find us on Twitter and Blue Sky. We got a link tree in the bio. You could find all our resources. We've got a Patreon where we've got some written content as well. The podcast is always free. Feel free to drop in whenever you want. You want some extra written stuff covering CF Montreal specifically, but also some other Montreal stuff. We got a professional women's league finally up here, and some national team stuff. We're definitely going to be covering all of that and more. Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, yeah, and head on over there. I was just scrolling through quickly, kind of their stuff. I love the content. I don't. The problem with being a general MLS is things get
Mhm.
lost sometimes. So,
I
you
can
you,
imagine.
you
Yeah,
get a lot of content, a lot of quickly, a
it's a
lot of
big league,
quickly.
right? So
Yeah, and
compared to
it's
other
only
leagues, right?
and
Yeah,
it's only growing. But yeah, listen, if it's your first time here,
I
we
believe it
are.
is. Yeah,
Yeah, we are very, very happy to have you and would love to get you back because it's tough to find honestly, it's been tough to find Canadian pods. People want to chat with us. So listen,
well,
we had a
we're
great
always
time.
here. Give us a shout, and we would love to come on.
Awesome, man. We appreciate it. And we are the same for you as well. If you are new here, or this is your first time listening to us, we've got 30 of these coming out over the next couple of days. We got 30 in 15 days. So if you are interested in what any other team is looking like, we've got previews on them from other content creators as well. So give us a follow as well. But thank you so much again for being here. And thank you to our
Thank you
listeners
for
for
having me.
having a quick listen to our chat. We hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.